Hello, everyone. Welcome again to episode 5 of Terminal Vocation. I'm your host, Deacon Mark.
And I'm Erin Voorhees.
And we're here to talk about, actually start a new series today on, I think, what most people would say are probably the top 5 issues that tend to cause problems in marriages that need to be discussed before getting engaged, before getting married. Money, kids, sex, family of origin, and religion politics.
Okay.
So over the next 5 weeks, we're going to talk about those, probably in that order, give or take. So we're going to start today talking about money. But before we jump in, how you doing? How's your week?
Our weeks have been really good. So we've been busy because we were gone the last 2 weekends picking up our daughter at graduation at Franciscan University of Steubenville, which was awesome.
Life got cheaper.
Life got cheaper, and graduation was very fun, and friends and family that we met there were fun. We brought the grandmas, so that was a good trip. And then last weekend we were up in St. Paul picking up 2 of our kids from their first year of serving with Net Ministries, and that was also fun. Just, again, I felt like just meeting their friends and the families. It was just such a time of closeness with people we really didn't know, but it's wonderful.
It was wonderful. You're leaving out, of course, the 32 hours in the car.
Oh my gosh.
To get to Minnesota and back. That was a good time.
Yeah, that was a long time.
Yeah, we love a road trip, but that was a little bit much even for us.
Yeah, we tend to break it up a lot more than we did this time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was difficult.
Yeah, but
we survived.
We are not immune to the realities of price, fuel prices and airline fares and all the other things that made us decide ultimately to drive instead of fly.
Yep.
So, well, before we jump into talking about money, let's talk about, we mentioned graduation. We were at our daughter's graduation, and actually the speaker there referred to artificial intelligence, and this seems to be a theme going on. So we got a couple links to some different articles, but every graduation speaker is talking to graduates about AI.
Yeah, but the difference was at our graduation, people were at least polite enough not to boo him.
And that's what I was going to say, is that then every graduate is expressing their discomfort with AI. And it's a scary thing, right?
Sure.
If you're young person who's just gotten a degree and you're looking at the work landscape, AI seems terrifying.
Yeah.
In probably the
Daunting.
same way, and I think a lot of these speakers were talking about it as sort of a modern industrial revolution. I think it's probably an apt analogy in terms of changing the way the workforce works.
Yeah.
Operates. How many employees are needed for this, that, or the other thing. And so what I thought was sort of a relevant conversation point for us is then, how do we talk to our kids, right? How do we as a speaker talk to our audience? How do we as parents talk to our kids about things that are maybe scary, things that they're going to be facing, right? So you're going to start preschool, you're going to start kindergarten, you're going to start those things, and they don't want to do it. They're booing us as their parents. And so how do we broach those conversations and have those talks?
I think what's so interesting to me as an only child, and then having 4 children who are, as all children are, very different, is that there's different ways that you talk to each of them. Sometimes I remember that. Sometimes I don't, at my peril. But we had a situation where we had to talk to kids about changing schools at one point, and people handled that all very differently. And it's hard when you talk to the group, because each kid has different needs about difficult conversations. So I think that can be challenging.
Yeah, and I think I remember a conversation once. It was a Christmas that our parents were going to take everybody to Disney. And they wanted us to give the kids this news around the Christmas tree on Christmas morning, and one of our kids didn't handle the news very well, right? They were upset about that. And sort of looking back, it's like, well, they were ultimately, within an hour or so, kind of got used to the idea.
Well, she wanted to be home with her stuff.
She wanted to be like, I've opened
all these
this toy and that thing, and I want to be here, and this is what we've always done. But what was interesting is we weren't prepared for it.
No.
And so, sometimes I think as you go into these conversations with your kids, there's some things that, like you say, your kids are different. Some of them are going to handle this news a certain way. But then sometimes there's a response that is just, where'd that come from?
Yeah, you didn't see that coming.
That's hard.
But I think in hindsight it made sense, but it didn't occur to us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think in considering like our communication with our kids, I think I have here about like maybe 4 guidelines, if you will, for kind of delivering difficult news, right? Because I think a lot of the speakers, they were kind of just focused on being very matter-of-fact about things and trying to deliver what was probably a necessary but uncomfortable truth, right? It's here. You need to be prepared for it. You need to deal with it. If you're concerned, you need to take a more proactive role. Go out and be the change and fix it. And yeah, all true. But, for those that were scared. So here's, maybe 4 sort of watchwords, I think, for us with our kids, right? Number 1 is, and you alluded to this, each kid is different. Like, we've got 4 kids, and we're constantly surprised, like, how did 4 people this different come from the same DNA cocktail, right?
Yeah.
And so it's important to think about, how is this news going to be received by kid 1, kid 2, kid 3? So yeah, we talked about that a little bit, but I think the second is to be ready with analogies.
You're good at this. This doesn't always come naturally to me.
Sometimes I think we each have something that we think of better than others, like in the moment, right? Like, and I think it's when it's sometimes easy to come up with an analogy when you're preparing for it or when you're thinking about things. That one where it kind of caught us by surprise is a little bit harder. But yeah, I think something like, when a kid is starting kindergarten and they're scared about it, being like, I know this is scary. Remember you started preschool a couple of years ago, and that was a little bit scary too, but look how great that ended up. And this, and so trying to find ways that they can fit the expectation of that new experience into something that they've been through to give them some kind of a frame of reference for it. Like, oh, I've overcome this already.
Well, and that's confidence building, right? Like, I did this. Like, yeah, you saw that and it worked out okay. You're going to deal with what comes. I mean, that's a big confidence boost to have accomplished something like that.
Yeah, and I think exactly what you're saying is important too, to like reinforce to them how great you were dealing with this and how strong you were and how brave you were. Like, kind of the fake it till you make it a little bit, but encouraging them that you've done this, you're capable, because sometimes we don't always, nobody often thinks that we're capable of doing something, and other people see that strength in us more than we see it in ourselves.
And sometimes I think, especially as a child, I know I would forget what I had done almost in the face of the thing that was kind of new and scary. And it was like everything else went out the window that I've ever done. And so having someone to remind you, yeah, but you accomplished this. You were nervous when you started preschool. I was, trying to put yourself back into that time. And so that perspective, I think, is really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. They don't even remember ever having been scared before starting that other new thing. Yeah, I think that's right. Kind of related to analogies, but maybe a little bit different, is to kind of be ready with some empathy. Like, what are some experiences that you've had that you can tell them, hey, Dad went through this, Mom went through this. Let me tell you how this was for me. Let me tell you how I was scared. You were scared. It never occurs to a kid that you,
as the adult,
big grown-up adult, were ever scared of anything.
Sure.
And so, showing them that we can be scared of things, do them anyway, overcome them.
My dad was fabulous at that. Like, especially if it was like a situation where I was embarrassed, those like middle school embarrassments, whatever happened, and he'd be like, oh yeah, one time I remember, XYZ. And I loved the way he told stories. So there was always just this grueling details that he had to go through. And it just always made me, we'd end up laughing. It made me feel better. Like, misery loves company a little bit there.
Sure.
Like, you're not the only one this has happened to. Yeah, he was good at that.
And then the last thing I think, and this is just true probably really with communication broadly speaking, but especially with kids, being patient and unaffected by drama.
Oh,
right?
Hard. Yeah.
Don't let someone else's, and especially our kids, don't let their drama bring us to the dramatic, right? We're trying to be a very calming, steady force for them. And so the more we can say, this is all right, I'm not worried about this, I understand you're worried about it, but the more we can just kind of keep things level, probably in conversations in general, right? We talked about this with communication the other day, anyone. And try not to ever escalate, but kids are dramatic, right? It's who they are. It's what, and probably from a survival perspective, they need to be.
Well, and having so little experience of the world and of life, like just 5 years on this planet, 10 years, even 20 years on the planet, you just don't have the breadth of having been through a lot of things. Yeah. For most people. There's always exceptions.
Yeah. Smaller pots boil over faster than large cauldrons, right?
Yeah.
So, that's definitely going to be true. So I think those are some things that, ultimately would help when presenting this. I don't know if these graduation speakers would maybe do well to have thought about some of the same things. Some of these articles we're posting, one of them did have Steve Wozniak. I think you pointed this out, and we're sort of pulling this out, right? How he was really, he got a good reception because he was talking badly about AI, and then everybody was on his side instantly. Yeah,
he was saying actual intelligence was what you really need in this world. Right. And he said he very rarely uses AI. Yeah. Also, just as an aside, he was speaking at Grand Valley State University, as my uncle says that is the Harvard of the Midwest. So yeah. Well,
somebody had to be. They took it on.
Somebody, yes, the Grand Valley. Go. I don't even know what their mascot is, but yeah.
Oh gosh,
You usually know. But yes, I thought that was interesting. He definitely knew his audience, and they didn't publish the rest of his speech in that article. But even from that point, if you compliment your audience, know your audience, you could go on to talk about how AI is coming, but that it obviously needs actual intelligence, and that message is softened.
And that's kind of what I wondered as sort of maybe almost a fifth point here, right? Is like giving the information that enlists them in what's being done, right? Of leading with the thing that encourages them or shows them that you're on their side, right? Actual intelligence. Hey, you're never going to be replaced, to the grads, right? Yeah, actual intelligence is always going to be a paramount. ... We have to talk about this industrial revolution and how we're going to weather that and thrive within it. So a lot to think about there, but now we got to talk. The industrial revolution is coming or is here or whatever we want to call it, right? And so that gets very much into money.
Okay, let's talk about
money, right? How are we going to, we're all concerned about food, shelter, those basic needs at the base of the pyramid in terms of Maslow. Well,
sure.
All that really translates from a modern day human perspective into income. How do I pay for all those things? So money very much becomes something that is foundational for our survival. But there is a reality that concern about money is going to lead to arguments and fights and concern, right? So I think money is certainly one of those things that is going to become a wedge issue between couples. And so figuring out how do we evaluate something as important as that while we're in a relationship, before we get engaged, while we're engaged, before we decide to get married, while we're married, in terms of preventing conversations. So what do we think we need to evaluate about a person in terms of their relationship with money early on in the dating phase, right?
I think, again, I'll go back to what we said in one of our earlier conversations for me, when I was dating, was very much an observational role because if I'm newly dating somebody, I don't really have any right to be making financial decisions or really giving them my opinion about financial decisions, I would say, certainly in the first several dates. But I think it's an observation time. Are they blowing their hard-earned money on different things. Are they careless? If this guy asks me out, is he paying? How does that look as we're dating?
Yeah, and I think that's a good place to start. I mean, who's paying for that first date, right? And there was a time that it was, always sort of unequivocally the man pays for the date. I think that's probably still true 90% of the time. I think that's because 90% of the time the guy is asking. And I think that might be the one change I would see is I think a lot of times whoever has asked for the date is sort of on the hook to pay for that date, right?
Yeah.
I've invited you to come do something with me. It is my treat. I would like to show you a good time. So I think that's a reasonable expectation for both parties to have.
It seems like it. It just seems like it takes out awkward conversations when you're first starting. Like, oh, we're going to split this $7.50 bill right down the middle, right? Like, but I also feel like in my dating practice, as I got closer to meeting you and to getting married, I mostly let myself be taken out. I, again, was kind of following those sort of rules of dating. There was a book in the 90s called The Rules, and that was definitely like the guy initiated, you received. And then at some point, once we had been dating for a while, then I would ask you out and I would pay. But I wouldn't say right in the beginning.
Well, but I think that latter part, I think that's important for the guy to evaluate the young woman's relationship to money. Because, if we get to date 5, 6, 7, and there's never been any indication, desire, etc., from her to want to reciprocate.
Sure.
Hey, I'd like to take you out. I'm enjoying this relationship as well, and I'd like to appreciate you and honor you. I think that's, I don't think that's a bad thing to desire or want. Or to evaluate, because otherwise I think it could seem like the girl is happy to just be taken care of.
Sure.
And that perception is, I don't think that's going to be healthy for the relationship long term either.
No. Well, and I think too, hopefully, as a woman dating, you have some things you would like this guy you're dating to see and let me buy tickets to this event that I don't know, I'm going to say a ballet because I would like a ballet or a poetry reading or something like that. Like, we should be going to things that both of us want to go to, or he mentioned something and I want to take him to that,
Yeah.
He likes bourbon tasting and I want to take him to the bourbon tasting that I saw.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's interesting, that sort of balance between wanting to show him or her the things that I love and introduce them to that, but also wanting to, as a gift, do those things for them because I know that they love them.
Because they love
those
them.
other things.
Yeah, should go both ways.
Then you were talking as well about like observing how people are using money, and I think that's sort of the next step is kind of watching what is someone's relationship with money look like? How do they use it? Is money a source of power for them? Is it a source of control, right? Do they enjoy flashing cash and, doing decadent things, not because they want to be generous, but because they want to be noticed?
Sure. Well, or do you ever hear them say about, oh, I tithe to this group, or I donate my time or my money to this charity, or like, what are you hearing? Or is it just always, I bought this for myself, I bought this for myself, or,
Yeah. It's always a little complicated in terms of, right, how much do we talk about? When you donate, don't let the left hand know what the right one is doing.
Yeah.
But I do think in a longer term relationship, there should be some indication of what someone is doing in terms of giving to the church or other charities. Like, it shouldn't be something that they're flaunting.
No.
But it should come up that they care enough about a certain cause to be supporting it. I think that's right. That's right. So then I think this third thing, establishing at some point what someone's long-term life goals and the financial goals associated with those. And what does it look like they're doing to achieve them? Now, you're not going to get a credit report or a balance sheet probably in the first, couple weeks. That would be weird.
That would be weird.
But if you know that somebody has a job that they're making, $15 an hour, and they're driving a, brand new Benz or something like that. No shade against someone who drives a Benz, but if the lifestyle doesn't seem to fit the income,
where's the money coming from?
Then you have to ask, some questions there.
Right.
And at some point, I think if you're in a relationship and trying to push it to those next steps, I think some of those conversations are fair game. Now, maybe you don't do it in an accusing way,
right?
But just say, hey, what do you think retirement looks like, or what do you think, what's your goal professionally? How do you want to live your life? Where do you want to live your life? I mean, as you're starting to kind of figure out what a future would look like in terms of homes and stuff like that, then you would get some indication of how is someone making that possible.
Well, and I think careers are pretty easy things to talk about. I mean,
right.
Retirement and where you're going to live, maybe that seems like you're pressuring somebody, but like, what are your career goals?
Yeah.
What do you want? Like, I see you work at this job. Do you love it? Or you trying to get into something else? So that certainly is an easy point of entry for those type of conversations. And then you're right, as you get to know that person more of that stuff should be getting revealed.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. These all have a stair step or an escalator function in terms of how deep we're going into the topic, right?
But I think it's also fair at some point in the relationship when you're getting more serious, probably before you're engaged, if there are things that are red flags or things you don't understand, to be willing to have that conversation. And maybe there is a perfectly good explanation for why this person is driving a Mercedes-Benz when he's only earning $15 an hour.
Of course.
But how does that shake out, and how is that conversation received? That seems fair.
So let's talk about engagement. Right? So some of this information you would feel like, okay, you should know some details before you're going to move into an engagement. Maybe not the full picture, but once you're engaged, you get to a point where you're starting to plan on hitching your financial future to that other person, right? Joint credit reports and those sorts of things. So here's a first question. How big should the ring be?
I gotta lean with what you can pay. I'm going to say cash. I know we don't spend cash that way, but what you have hopefully set aside and saved for that event. Like it would make me nervous to have somebody that paid for a ring on a credit card and didn't have the money for that. So
guilty.
I didn't know that though. But I think having money set aside, to prepare for that. So I think for women, we do get blinded by the light in the jewelry shops. It's very easy to be like, oh, bigger, clearer, better clarity, all that stuff. But really, what really matters is the long-term planning and the marriage, not just the engagement, the wedding, the bling that comes with the engagement and the wedding and that kind of stuff. It's really what the long-term goal is.
I don't disagree with any of that. The one sort of thing that I would say that might seem like a disagreement is that I do think that something as important as an engagement ring should hurt a little bit. But it should hurt in the sense not that you're financing it and paying for it for the next 10 years of your joint married life. Ideally, it should have hurt for the last 6-8 months that you've been setting it aside in order to get to there.
Yeah, I agree.
And when I say hurt a little bit, I mean a little bit. It shouldn't be impossible. But the fact that, maybe while you were dating, you had a little bit more ramen and a little bit less ribeye in order to set some of that aside to buy a ring. I don't think that's a bad thing because there is a sign value to the fact that, I'm giving you something that is eternal, that is permanent.
Sure.
And I want it to look like it means something. It should be should be better than a Cracker Jack toy. But if you're that $15 an hour person, it also probably shouldn't be a 5-carat
Right.
monolith either, right?
And it should be metal. I know the, like, what are they, silicone rings and stuff like that. Amen. People that work with their hands, or you don't want to lose it or something, but you should have a metal, precious metal in your ring.
Well, and I'll say, as a deacon that marries people, I can't consecrate rings that aren't a precious metal. So the exchange of rings does have to be, something that is, precious. And I understand, like you say, the silicone ones. Like, the beautiful thing about those silicone rings is that someone who says, I have a job where I can't wear this, but I still want people to know who I am and that I have this. And so I applaud that. Mm-hmm. But just don't make that the only one that you have, right? Have the other one that, like, you come home and swap it out.
Right. Go out for a nice evening. That's what you wear. Yeah.
So what about the wedding, right? I think this becomes a really interesting financial conversation. How big should it be? How much can we afford? So the trend that I'm seeing with a lot of the couples is very polarizing. I see some weddings getting bigger and bigger, and then I see on the other side getting smaller and more reasonable.
Interesting.
And I don't see a lot of, like, the same as it was. I see people doing more and more of all the things that they've seen on TikTok or wherever else. That's cool. I have to do that. And then I see couples who are, we're just going to get some catered barbecue. And, we're in, a really nice backyard somewhere. Yeah. And maybe not backyard. Maybe they've rented someplace, but they figured out, where can we save? And
we went to a great wedding reception at Fire Hall. It was wonderful. Mm-hmm. It was great. Okay, so obviously people can do whatever they want. I think setting a budget and sticking to it, and setting a budget for parents, if parents are helping, to say, here's what we can contribute. It's just, it's not the end. It's not a never ending money tree that, right. We want to now do these flowers that are much more expensive, or now we really need individual whatevers. I guess I go back to the idea again. It is a day. It's a really important day. But you're really in it for the long haul. So I think something that doesn't put you into a financial burden, put anyone into a state of being financially burdened by it, is probably I guess that would be my criteria. But that's going to look different for everyone.
And I think the other thing that gets into this, how big should the wedding be, and is going to kind of spill over from where do finances become interpersonal issues. Mm-hmm. What if the rehearsal dinner is in a fire hall with barbecue, but then the reception is at the Ritz, and is we get this incongruity between the two, families. Right? Between families, and so I think that's something that has to be watched and figured out. Okay, who's this going to alienate on either side, and ultimately figure out a way to make sure that the different parties and trappings that are associated with the wedding aren't creating a wedge between your families. If we come into our wedding planning with the idea that it has to look this way, I've always wanted such and such since I was a kid.
I wanted 6 white stallions to lead me in a carriage. Well, yeah. I mean, you have to. Those can be some dicey issues to navigate with families anyway.
Yeah.
Especially at the beginning. I mean, I think we hopefully learn how to deal with extended family, in-laws, and things over time. So merging those cultures is tough. And then, gosh, if there's like a big disparity in income between the families and what one family can do and another. I mean, I'm sure there are ways to handle that with grace and mercy, which you hope happens.
But make sure that that's top of mind, right, and not an afterthought, because it can be, a problem. And Okay, so the other aspect of the engagement, that's all around some of those trappings, but let's talk about what we're planning for in terms of a life together. So what do we think about joint versus separate checking accounts?
Oh, I'm all in joint.
Yeah.
Firmly.
Yeah, I think I am too, 100%. I've talked to different folks about this, different priests who are also doing pre-Cana. And in talking to them, I said, I really believe that this is necessary. Because I think if you have separate checking accounts, it becomes an opportunity to hide things from each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned, talking to some of them because, one was saying, well, I know it's complicated and starting new accounts and closing accounts. It's not that complicated.
Pretty easy these days.
It's a couple.
It can be a pain, but
yeah, okay. We've got some online banking, and we got to change where this is happening or that's happening, but it's not. It's not rocket science.
I think that temptation sometimes to hide things, and we see it sometimes in this, like in the old TV sitcoms where the mother and the daughter come home from shopping, and she's like, "Run these up to your bedroom so your father doesn't see," right? Like this stereotypical hiding it from dad. Mm-hmm. I mean, such a bad precedent, and such a bad precedent to be passing on to your daughter and like keeping the secret against her father, your husband, kind of thing. Yeah. So trying to budget better, so ahead of time you know how much you're going to spend, and then also being able to say, we tried to do it for $200 and we spent $300. Like, here's what do we have to take anything back? Like, what are working as a family,
yeah,
to figure out financially what needs to happen there.
And I think that goes into, you mentioned like, we thought we were going to spend this, and one of the things that we did when we were engaged and getting married is we set a spending limit, mm-hmm. right? So neither of us could spend over $100 without talking to the other person. Now that dollar figure, I don't clear with you every time I go fill up my car with gas anymore.
Which now, can be over $100. No, but things that were outside
the normal,
usual.
Right? Yeah.
Well, and if anybody knows me, they know I have this like crazy curly hair, and the curly hair products that I feel like I need to buy, you may disagree, get expensive. And so when I do those still, I'm like, hey, putting in an order for these, just as a heads up, because it does hit the bank account. Mm-hmm. we do need to pay those bills and try to do it smartly. But there are certain things, or certainly gifts, or not gifts for each other, but like, I really need, I shouldn't say gifts. I should have said more like a something that is maybe more of a want and less of a need, but we're going to say, hey,
right.
I'm thinking of doing this. I need a new purse, and I'm thinking of spending this much.
And so I think figuring out, what is that number?
Yeah.
That's right. But it facilitates communication. Okay, why am I spending this? What am I spending it on? How is that good for me, the family? Mm-hmm. How does that stay in line with our goals, or depart from them?
I think it also goes back to when you're talking about joint checking accounts, and that is having separate checking accounts allows for kind of this ability to not mention certain things, or you could blatantly hide, but just sin of omission. I think when you have that commitment with somebody and you've said, okay, if I'm spending more than $100 unexpectedly, I'll tell you, it's kind of like, oh shoot, do I really want to buy this? Because then I'm going to have to go home and say, I spend this. So I will say, as someone who does like to shop on certain things, I think that has helped me to be honest. Like, if I can look at Mark and say, this is what I'm planning on doing, or this is what I did. Okay, that might be a good purchase. If not, what's going on there? What am I looking for?
Yeah. And then figuring out with those spending limits also, of having a conversation when we're doing something that is, maybe it's not over the limit, but maybe in aggregate, it gets there. I know I've had times where I was going to the coffee shop on my way into work more often, or something.
Yeah.
And I loved it, and I felt like there was, the where everybody knows your name kind of thing. Right? But over the course of time, even if it's just plain black coffee, it's still $2, $3, $5. a morning. So over the course of a month, that's over $100 too. So having those conversations, just say, I like this. Okay, well, that's great that you like it, but it's not really in our plan, so stop it.
Or can we,
can it be Fridays or, something like that.
What's a limit that we could put on it?
So all this goes back to the idea of budgeting.
Yes,
Everybody loves this word.
Oh, my gosh.
And then there's lots of different ways to do budgeting. There's we had a really great plan, or I did before we got married, of budgeting. It was called The Force.
Oh my gosh.
And it was, I think I make about this much, and I think I've spent about that much, so I'm good.
I remember discovering this about you because I was balancing the checkbook, and I said, well, how do you do this? Like, this is my method, and here's how I do it, and it's such a pain. How do you do it? And you revealed
the blank check register.
That your plan was the blank check register and The Force, and I thought, ruh-roh, we should have maybe had this conversation a little earlier than we did.
Yeah, that was certainly not the best means, and it wasn't really born out of total apathy so much as it was, you get that first job out of college and you've got income and you just think everything's going to be fine forever. And then you get married, now you're double income, no kids, and everything's going to be fine forever. And then we had kids and you stopped working, and all of a sudden, where did the money go? What happened? So
it was shocking.
Yeah. So, having some plans around that in terms of budgeting it. And so budgeting has gotten easier, I think, with a lot of the tools that are out there in terms of online banking. And so
find a good tool.
Know what your income is, know what your outflow is, and make sure one is less than the other. And so this goes back to the idea of credit. Mm-hmm. And, we're not trying to do a Dave Ramsey show here. Nothing against Dave Ramsey, but we're not him. But I do think it's an important conversation to say, how are we going to use credit? Are we going to use credit?
Sure.
What level of comfort do we have with debt? I think we've come to a point now where we are less and less comfortable with debt. Mm-hmm. And, we've got a home loan. We're sort of okay with that. We're probably of that category of people that is using a credit card for convenience, but paying it off.
I think for most of our marriage, we've kept no balance. I mean, I'm sure there were times.
For the most part, yeah.
But yeah, that was kind of one of our goals, was a credit card is for convenience. It's not for
financing.
For financing things.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then, doing all the necessary, having an account for emergencies, all this stuff. Again, we don't need to, you can look that up on a different show or somewhere else. But figuring out what your plan is going to be in terms of budgeting and then sticking with it. But I will say, from experience, I felt like we would stick with something, we would fall off the wagon. Mm-hmm. We'd have to come back and recommit. We'd have to change things, like we were spending too much, or we had put too much in, clothing category. We needed to shift it to auto repair or whatever it was. But I think, again, it goes to that conversation. And we've talked about this before, of a monthly sit down. I mean, that's a great time to just review the finances, who's in charge of the finances at that point. Because like we've said, it would switch back and forth between us. But great, what's going on with the finances? How are we doing? Are we saving what we thought? Are we, does somebody need to get a second job?
Yeah.
How can we spend less? I can remember when I stopped working to stay home with the kids. One of the things we talked about was, having the best offense is a good defense, and trying to keep money from going out. So what can we do to save money? The money that we get, which was greatly reduced when I stopped working.
Yeah, and that's maybe a good point to end on, is that idea of, especially if someone stays home, that one person is doing offense in terms of income, right? But the other person is often then going to be making sure that it stays in the home, that it doesn't flow out, right? And so it's really important to focus on both those sides of the equation. So make sure that you're recognizing that, because the defense is really hard to do, right? To tell someone, I don't think we should spend that. I don't think we should do that. It's not welcome information. It makes you boo the commencement speech.
Stop saying things that I don't want
that
to hear.
I don't like, right?
Right.
So we have to honor that when someone is saying no, but is doing it because they have our longer term goals as a couple in mind. We have to begrudgingly find a way to appreciate that,
or continue to talk about it over time. But I think it's the quick purchases that are big and expensive that don't serve us well. So maybe it's an ongoing conversation or a goal that you set for down the road.
So, last thoughts on money?
No, I think that's everything. I have one last thought, that this podcast might be noisier than our others, just because we have 3 of our children home. I think the dog came in and out. People were, I don't know what picked up on the microphone, but if you hear it, that's just family life.
That's life. Mm-hmm. That's life. And if you're living life and you'd like to hear it talked about here, send us an email to terminalvocation@gmail.com. We'd love to hear what other topics you'd like to hear us talk about. We're always interested. Let us know about any opinions you have on anything we talked about today. Joint checking accounts versus separate. Give us pros and cons. Let's have a debate. You've been listening to Terminal Vocation, a VoFam production. I'm Deacon Mark, along with my wife and co-host Erin. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back next week.
Bye-bye.